Member for Paul River Sunshine Coast.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's my privilege to speak to Bill 22 at second reading. And I will echo the considered comments of my friend who has roundly and I think forcefully and eloquently stated the reasons for our principled opposition to this bill. I would prefer to suggest, instead of simply and correctly stating that we'll be vociferously voting against this, if we can stand up vociferously, but I would also suggest to the minister that it's perhaps an opportunity should be taken to reconsider some of the provisions of this legislation, and in fact, perhaps withhold it for now until the proper corrections can be made to a bill, which, you know, as a former social worker, I'm sure that the minister has some good intention with this legislation somewhere, and it might be just difficult to find, you know, beneath all the words. But the legislation as it stands right now is very problematic, and it's problematic for liquor outlets, it's problematic for grocery store owners, it's problematic for wine stores, it's problematic for small businesses throughout this province, rural and urban alike. And I find it remarkable to consider that so much talk has gone into the presentation of liquor reform by this government. Whenever there was something bad in the news, they'd announce something that would make us all get distracted and see something shiny. And I understand that tactic. I understand that effort on government's part to distract people from things that are going to cause them concern. But using liquor legislation and liquor reform as that shiny object seems to fall flat here, because this is nothing that is going to make anybody excited or interested in changing the subject. This in itself is so contrary to what the people of the province were promised over the last 2 years, I would suggest. And I know that people from all political stripes look at this bill and are searching for where there is fairness. Where is this level playing field? Now, I'm not sure if maybe the minister was referring to a level playing field for the big grocery chains and a level playing field for the independent, smaller grocery chains. That's two level playing fields. So maybe the minister was talking about the minister wants to create two level playing fields, which just happen not to be at the same level. I'm not sure that's how we usually use that kind of terminology. Maybe in this house, when we kind of weasel words sometimes just to get around the actual factual reality of the legislation. But I think when you say a level playing field, it's supposed to mean level. And I think what we have is multi-leveled, a multi-level playing field. Maybe that's what was just missing a word in the press release. We're creating a multi-level playing field for people in the liquor industry in British Columbia. And who doesn't like a multi-level playing field? You can watch many sports at once if we think of it in literal sense. This particular legislation is creating hardship, will create hardship. It probably has created hardship, listening to my colleague, for folks who are now sitting on a license that is of unknown value. It's unknown value. So you have suddenly these grocery stores in rural parts of our province are going to be subject to an auction, and that auction is likely to include bidding as high as you can for a license. I'm presuming that's what an auction sounds like to me. People don't usually go, 10, 20, 30, 20, 10. They go higher and higher. So those with the deepest pockets, as has been mentioned already, are going to be at a great advantage over those who don't have those same deep pockets. So there's a level playing field for the people with the deep pockets, and there's a level playing field for those with less deep pockets. And I have to say, I'm I'm doubtful that even this government could construe or could pull this one out of a hat without thinking that folks are going to have a problem with it. So we have a situation where the rules that have generally governed liquor licenses in our province seem to be almost, maybe they're being ripped up, but they're certainly being heavily amended and with an incredible impact on the purveyors of goods in this province. And I'm concerned about the fact that, you know, there doesn't seem to be any restriction on location, and in my communities that I represent, I can see a number of severe conflicts potentially arising from this legislation. Not just conflicts over the fact that people are not going to be able to bid for in-store or wine on the shelf licenses, but just the fact that they could be located next to existing government stores, next to existing liquor retail outlets. Who knows? It's possible, I suppose, that even in our rural areas where there are rural agency stores, that there might be some impact there. We don't actually know. But you know, my worry is not that I don't necessarily know, it's that it's clear that the minister doesn't know what the impact of this legislation is going to be. And if the minister actually does know the impact of this legislation, then I'm kind of shocked. I'm kind of shocked that the minister would actually contemplate pursuing this legislation and pushing this legislation through the legislature if she really did understand the impact. And it's possible, it's very possible, in fact, I would suggest it's even likely that not all consequences of this legislation have been thought through. And evidence of that would be in the fact that answers were given 2 weeks ago to questions about changes in liquor legislation that don't coincide with the reality of this legislation. Not just 2 weeks ago, but 2 months ago and 6 months ago. There were quotes from the minister about what the people of the province could expect from legislation. There were hints, there were little breadcrumbs spread along the trail that people followed. People did things with their licenses. People contemplated purchasing locations. They thought about shelf space in their grocery stores for the previous regime, which involved a lottery system. Well, we go from lottery to auction. What happened to good governance, applications, changing of policy that meets the needs of the communities, meets the expectations of communities? Now, what sometimes inflames the argument is the suggestion that the minister made that, you know, there are members of this side of the House who support this kind of legislation. There are elements, obviously, there are elements in the legislation, in the changes that the minister's brought about in British Columbia that are beneficial to people of the province. Let's not pretend that everything that the government always does is always negative. There are things about the liquor changes that have met with satisfaction from the public and from craft breweries and from distillers and from, and the minister thinks. That was the sound of one hand clapping, Mr. Speaker. That's the sound of 6 hands clapping. Yeah, I think that the minister's attempt at humor is pleasant, but it is kind of distracting from the fact that really what we're talking about here is legislation that's unsupportable. And I think if any of the backbench members of the legislature on the government side read this legislation, they would see the failure, really, the failure of the minister to accomplish the goals that she promised the people of the province. Just the promises that were made, I don't know what, maybe I'm misunderstanding the words of when the minister says that nobody has to worry, there won't be new licenses, the 1 kilometer rule will remain, the discounts will be the same for everyone. Maybe when I hear that from the minister, I think she's telling us what she means. Clearly, the minister is saying something she doesn't mean. What is that? How are we supposed to, how is anyone supposed to know what the minister means when she changes what she means? She says one thing one day, another thing the next. Like that. I don't hear her clapping anymore. I don't hear her smiling. I don't even hear her rolling her eyes. This is the reality. We've got a situation where yeah, it's possible. It's possible. My concern is for constituents. My concern is for those people in my communities who are going to be negatively impacted by this legislation. And whether the minister wants to joke about it or not, I think she has to realize that this is not a good piece of legislation, and it's going to result in problems for our communities. And she can ignore me when she feels like it, and she can listen when she feels like it. That's her prerogative. But when she tells people of this province one thing and does the absolute opposite the next day, I think the rest of the province has to realize we have a problem with this minister. And now, yesterday, my colleague gave her the benefit of the doubt. Yeah, maybe she had nothing to do with writing the legislation. Very, very possible. Maybe she wasn't properly briefed on the legislation. Entirely possible. Maybe she doesn't understand the legislation. Very likely. Maybe she hasn't contemplated the negative impact on constituents of hers and of mine. That is unfortunate, because it's her duty. It is the minister's duty to reflect the interests of her community. And her community includes all of British Columbia, rural British Columbia, urban British Columbia. And, you know, it's kind of maddening when a minister thinks that it's a joke, that she changes her policy day to day to day to day. And I don't believe that those who are in the business of selling alcohol are going to be pleased with this minister. I think they've already expressed their concern. I don't understand the intransigence of a minister who says one thing and then presents a bill like this, within 2 weeks of saying the opposite of what the legislation holds in it. I'm troubled by that, because it further brings the process that we're engaged here into disrepute. And to me, sometimes it's not even the content. Sometimes it's just the attitude of government that is so offensive. You know, the government said there'd be no new outlets. Oh, except for the new outlets. You know, I don't get that.
Grant as many as you want.
Yeah, I dormant licenses. Well, they're going to be, woken up. Those are kind of like new. Maybe they're not new. Maybe the minister can get away with saying there are no new licenses. They were dormant, It's like, how many kids do you have? You don't just talk about the ones that are asleep or the ones that are awake, It's like this is the minister trying to get away, squeeze out from underneath the words she gave us a month ago. It's an explicit contradiction of the minister's previous comments in the media. Say one thing to the people outside, everyone claps. And she thinks that that's the way to bring legislation to this chamber. I don't understand how the minister thinks that an auction is going to be fair. Maybe she has a different definition of fair. Maybe it's like fair for some people and not fair for other people, or different kind of fair, really extra fair, major fair, like super fair, and then almost fair. Maybe that's fair. Maybe it's all fair. But the minister probably doesn't want to have to address that. Probably needs to read the legislation again to recognize it. And I'm not trying to be insulting, but when she responds in such a dismissive way to legitimate concerns, what are you left with in this place? What are you left with when ministers say one thing one day and another thing the next day? What are you left with when the minister of education promises something to the teachers of the province and then a few months later decides to completely ignore his ethical statements about talking to teachers, about communicating with teachers? This is what this minister is doing with the liquor industry, and I think the minister should be considering that. Maybe this is a trend, Mr. Speaker. The special wine store licenses, exempt from the 1 kilometer radius rule. Not only that, buying their product at a lower rate, and then grocery stores not having to pay the supplier until they've sold. I mean, this is everywhere you look, there's a different level. I mean, if I was playing on the minister's level playing field, we would all be like, you know, hurting ourselves pretty badly, pretty badly. I mean, I've played on some unlevel playing fields, by the way. You know, haven't been properly flattened out. It's not fair. It's not fair for anyone. You're the lucky one with the pothole in your end of the field, or you're the unlucky one with the big, huge anthill next to the goal. That's not a level playing field. I wonder if the minister knows what a level playing field is. You know, who supports this? Who supports this, Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker? Who supports this? I don't know. I think it's clearly it's a failure of the legislative drafting process, and if not the minister responsible, who's responsible? Like here we are again, you know, shuffling it off to someone else. Are you going to blame, is the minister going to blame someone else for the failure of this legislation? Is the minister going to blame someone else for completely misleading the people of the province? Who's responsible? I think the minister should be accountable for this. Does the minister agree? Does the minister agree that she has said one thing and done something completely different? Not just once, not twice, at least 6 times. And more were mentioned by my colleague from Vancouver Point Grey. I mean, it's quite clear to anyone who has a look at this that this is going to be bad for business. Bad for business. Bad management and bad for business. Wow, a hallmark of the Liberal Party. Bad for business, bad planning, bad management. Incompetence, perhaps? Maybe. Maybe it's incompetent. In December of 2014, the minister said, the government said, a limited number of new licenses will be made available specifically for the 100% BC wine on shelves model. A limited number. But on February 17th, we're not increasing the number of liquor outlets in BC, so anybody with a license is in pretty good shape. Maybe pretty good shape is one of those things. Pretty good shape. Good shape, really good shape, excellent shape, pretty good shape, shape, bad shape, no shape. That would be bad. Maybe this is where we have to figure out the Attorney General has a different scale, a different thermometer, sort of like maybe metric and Celsius or something. Pretty good shape for me, that means pretty good shape, but pretty good shape for her means like, oh, you're about to go under. I don't know. It's hard to tell because we have example after example of using words that we used to know as, you know, fair. It'll be fair. We're leveling the playing field. Everyone's going to be in pretty good shape. Well, it's unfair. There are a bunch of different level playing fields, and I don't think anyone's going to be in pretty good shape. So there's so many problems in this legislation. This is from Hansard, February 19th. A change that is not coming is the number of liquor outlets. I wonder if that was just thrown in, just because it's not usually written that way. A change that's not coming, I'll tell you something else that's not coming. Wow, it's just remarkable, really. We have a moratorium until 2022. What's that moratorium for? Everything else. We weren't talking about that. It's like, I don't know, I'm thinking there are probably people in this province who felt misled. I would suggest, I wonder if the minister minds that people in this province felt misled by her ministry. I wonder if she has a problem that people listening to her talking were misled. I wonder if she is concerned about the fact that the people in this province who have a government that's supposed to reflect the needs of the province, we're looking at there and going, were we just misled? Were we purposefully misled? Or were we just misled? Did we not understand it? I wonder if the minister thinks about the people who are selling LRSs or, you know, in grocery store. I wonder if she wonders if did she check? Do you feel misled by what I said 2 weeks ago compared to what legislation I tabled? That would be a good check, you know. I would suggest anytime you want to write a piece of legislation, check with some people, see if it's what you said you were going to do. And if it isn't, oh, a little percussion there.
Member, be careful about the equipment in the house.
I'm sorry?
I'm just cautioning you about the equipment in the house.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I should really have my hearing assistance thing on, but I will be cautious about everything that I do right now, just in case I missed what the caution was about. I think it was about hitting my microphone with the paper.
And don't mislead people.
What's that?
Don't mislead people.
Oh, no. Oh, I suppose the word I was using, yeah, I understand, Mr. Speaker. And I just wonder what people in the province are thinking when they're being told one thing for a couple of, at least 6 months to a year. They've been hearing the same thing over. No more outlets, you know, everyone's in pretty good shape, level playing field, fair. We find out it's pretty much the opposite. You know, I find it difficult to have to tell grocers in my area, grocers who don't have the pockets that maybe the minister's pandering to compete for these auctions, in these auctions. I worry about the people who aren't best buddies with the minister, who haven't maybe had the clearest line to her legislators, the people writing the legislation, I mean. Maybe I think about the independent grocers in my area, and I know that if they were ever asked about this, they would say quite clearly, this isn't going to be good. This is not a good idea. This is, in fact, it's a bad idea. You know, until there's some sort of, maybe it's too late. Maybe everybody knows now you can't really trust what the government's going to say because they're not going to do it anyway. Or if they do it, they're going to excuse it by saying, well, it's not what we meant. Those definitions that we've all agreed to since time immemorial are no longer in the definition, like fair and level. You know, level to me is not like the side of a pyramid. That's not level. And, you know, I don't understand. I don't understand how the minister thinks this is going to, that this is not just is a bad legislation. It's not what it's not what the minister promised, and you know that on the face of it is enough reason to say, well, what the heck is this government doing? Like, what are they doing? This? Like, who ever said anything about this? Nobody knew this was coming. You know, they're going to be able to buy. They're going to be able to buy the product at 26% below the price paid by other stores. I don't understand why the minister thinks that the people of the province are you know, going to be pleased with this. You know, people are like to have access to alcohol, but at the same time, you know, there needs to be some process that folks can count on. Due process, for example. Wouldn't that be nice? Due process. So, Honourable Speaker, to wrap it up, I guess, is to say that, you know, we will vote against it. We will do what we can in opposition to support the liquor outlets, to support grocery chains and independent grocers and to wine stores and the rest of the industry. We will stand here and vote, do our part. We'll do our part for the people of the province. We'll do our part for the small businesses that they claim to always, you know, be best buddies with. Like, I think everyone's seeing the falseness of that claim. They see the falseness of their claim to be good managers. That's just false. That's just talk. Just talk, and this just talk. It's talk about no new licenses. That's just talk. That's people, you know what? There's a word. There's a colloquial expression for that, which I can't use in the House, but it's just talk here. We just call it just talk. And the government's really good at just talking, but when you see what they write, when you see the kind of proposals they put forward, it's just obvious that there's no connection between what they say and what they do. That's fundamentally the problem with this legislation, Mr. Speaker. The government said one thing, and they're doing something else, and it's going to hurt constituents in my area. It's going to hurt British Columbian businesses. And for that reason, I hope the minister withdraws the bill. And if she chooses not to, well, we'll stand in opposition against it and wish for a day when there's a government that respects business and communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.